bad, shameful, shabby piece of legislation.
Call Sue Kedgley.
Mr Speaker, well, as someone who worked as a reporter in Television New Zealand and news and current affairs, and as a director and producer when Television New Zealand, I might say, was in its heyday, as a genuine public service broadcaster with documentaries screening regularly in prime time and extended current affairs programs, as someone who was part of that era, it is quite hard to figure out how we in New Zealand have ended up like this, as one of the only countries in the world without a public service television channel, with one of the most deregulated broadcasting media environments in the world, with no restrictions on foreign ownership of media, no restrictions on cross-media ownership, no restrictions on pay TV, no rules about just about anything, one of the only countries in the world with no regulated local content quota on television, and as a result which screens one of the least amounts of local programming in the world. And hard to believe too that probably in about half an hour's time our only publicly owned broadcasting channels, other than Maori TV, will exist for the sole purpose of returning a profit and a dividend to the government, and one could be forgiven for asking, what is the point of that? What is the point of having a publicly owned television channel which has no other mandate than to make money for its shareholder? There is no publicly owned television channel in the rest of the world with such a pathetic mandate. And it begs the question, in the absence of any regulation or any restrictions in our broadcasting environment, what would happen if the government, if it wins the next election, were to sell off TVNZ, now nicely fully commercialised and ready for sale, if it can find a buyer, and that clearly is its agenda? And what would happen if TV3 went bankrupt? Hopefully it won't, but it is not beyond the realms of possibility. We could be left with one foreign-owned, commercially driven network, such as owned by Sky TV, 40% owned by Rupert Murdoch, controlling all of the television channels in New Zealand. There is nothing in our media environment to prevent this. We could end up with pay TV, a couple of other channels owned by Murdoch, with a particular bias, such as Fox Television, and that could be all that is available in Television New Zealand. In New Zealand. So we could all be watching the equivalent of a Murdoch-owned Fox Television. Nothing to stop this happening in New Zealand. And even if this rather alarming scenario doesn't play out, there's no doubt even that in the short term, now that Television New Zealand has got no mandate to provide public service content, that we will end up with less and less New Zealand content on television, because we all know it is much cheaper to buy in imported programs from offshore than it is to make New Zealand programs. And at a recent broadcasting seminar, TV3 said that a commercial channel can only afford to screen about 20% New Zealand programs. It can't afford any more. That's what TV2 screens now. Actually, I think it's nearer 18 or 19%. So we will have channels in New Zealand, TV1, 2 and 3, and of course Prime screening more than 80% foreign content, and the only criteria, in fact, for Television New Zealand about whether they'll screen a program, the only criteria, it will be made by the sales department of TVNZ, and it will be whether it thinks the program will produce enough ratings and attract enough advertising. Who will care whether the programs are New Zealand made or not? And so TVNZ will become, under this new mandate, a nakedly commercial broadcaster, indistinguishable from any other channel, and we'll end up with less and less news and current affairs as well, because of course it's very expensive to make news and current affairs. And the only thing that TVNZ bosses will be focused on is making money, returning that dividend to the government. and they will have to fulfil this mandate no matter what personal misgivings they may have. Now, already the small amount of current affairs that we have on mainstream television, Campbell Live, Close Up, constantly interrupted with the hand-wringing mantra, "Oh, sorry, we've run out of time." And that's what we're just going to hear all over again, because no one's going to have time for in-depth exploration of current affairs or just about any other issue on this commercially focused TVNZ. One of the reasons that I believe we've ended up in this sorry state of affairs is that this government, like other Conservative governments, is deeply suspicious. Indeed, it seems to dislike public broadcasting, because I think it believes that it's got a left-wing bias and has a bias against the free market ideology. George Bush spent years targeting American public service broadcasting, and John Howard spent years attacking Australian public radio. Now, and we've had, since the 90s, we've had sustained attacks on public service broadcasting. In fact, I came across an article in 1998 written by Dennis Welsh when he was exploring the attacks on Radio New Zealand. And they were most interesting because they had uncovered a whole series of letters attacking Radio New Zealand by the Business Roundtable and its lobbyist, one Barry Saunders, who has now been appointed director of TVNZ. So Barry Saunders, a lobbyist for Business Roundtable, he was going on, he said, Radio New Zealand's programs are inherently anti-market and they're left-wing, and he said and they don't support, they're biased against the Business Roundtable, and he said, I feel that Radio New Zealand is beyond redemption, it should be shut down. Now that guy with a sustained attack against public service broadcasting has now been appointed, he's a lobbyist, he is a full-time lobbyist, and he has been appointed to the board of TVNZ. A lobbyist is now being appointed to run TVNZ. Quite clear what the agenda is, the same as it was with Radio New Zealand. It will be, his goal will be to shut down TVNZ. Interestingly, it's a shame Mr Ryle isn't here, because in the same article, Mr Ryle said, I am not convinced that we want all our stations owned by Mr Murdoch. Very prophetic, this. He said, in the sea of signals, you're going to want one or two lifeboats of New Zealand culture. That was Mr Ryle, 1998. Very prophetic, because that is what we're going to have. We're going to have all of our stations owned by Mr Murdoch, and we're going to be looking for one or two lifeboats of New Zealand culture. Now, Mr Coleman clearly shares his suspicion of those who work in public service broadcasting. He's got no understanding whatsoever of the importance of public service broadcasting for a healthy democracy, of having broadcasters who are free from commercial pressures, not beholden to any commercial or other interests, are not solely driven by television ratings and advertising schedules, who can look at different ideas and perspectives and speak without fear or favour. Mr Coleman, he has no understanding, no support for public service broadcasting. Rather, he supports the nakedly commercial broadcasting that others have pointed out has resulted in the atrocious scandal that we are seeing unfold in England, where Rupert Murdoch's empire has been engaged in shocking, illicit behaviour. And that is what happens when you have commercial media driven by the ratings, whose sole purpose is to bring in the ratings. They'll descend to any level, no matter how illicit, to get their ratings. In New Zealand, where we have no regulation whatsoever, there is that Rupert Murdoch could continue completely unfettered here in New Zealand, and if he's booted out of England, Zealand, that maybe is what he will seek to do. No, nothing to stop him, no cross-media rules. He could take over our entire media here without any problem, because there are no rules. So it is a very sad day. In about 20 minutes we'll see the end of public service broadcasting, apart from TV7, but that too is to be booted out. The government can't find $15 a year to fund one last public service niche broadcasting channel, but it can find $45 million for a sweetheart deal with the
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member. Her
it is
time
a
has
very,
expired.
very sorry day.
Call Te Ura Flavel.